Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with the 2MK team. Unfortunately, you may have some sound issues as we're both using the second stream station, and my voice is a little out due to the air quality in the area. But hopefully this will still mostly cover all of the things and you won't have too much difficulty hearing me. At least enough to actually get the bots in. So today, because we are covering both Marisa and DJ, we're going to be having a stream split into two halves. And I'm going to try to split it a little bit more cleanly than I usually do. So, if you are only really interested in DJ, you can either, if you're watching this on YouTube or similar, go forward almost exactly half an hour, basically until you start seeing DJ on the screen. And otherwise, let's just get right into it now. If you're not familiar with these streams, the general way that we will do this is to have you watch someone, in this case just me, fight the bot while explaining the reason for a bunch of things it does, followed by showcasing anything we have to say about the CPU and the reason for the bot creation, and then going into the inputs in case you want to get those from here rather than waiting for the release of the bots officially on Sunday, as well as therefore the point system so that you know what to aim for, beyond just here's the general reason why the bot exists. So what you are watching now is, in fact, Marisa bot in action. Marisa as a character is generally quite straightforward, but she has some key weaknesses that even the best players will probably fall prey to at some point. It's just basically the matchup that you have to play. And the bot is both meant to help you practice this slightly better than the CPU will, for reasons I'll explain when I show off the CPU part, and meant to simulate the best we can of Marisa players that we saw. This isn't actually much like our own Marisa player, because she basically helped us with the standard spacing setup and how to change the bot's rhythm so that it works, and even that wasn't really that necessary. This is a bot that basically functions with its meters set to normal because she uses a lot of normals and therefore doesn't tend to burn through her drive gauge all that fast, and she doesn't tend to use her CA gauges that much. She has them, she definitely has them, but she doesn't use them too often, so we don't worry about making sure she has extra. But you can set this up later. This is just the point of how the gauges should be set. For now, assume that they are set to what is normal for bots. The player 1, if you're on player 2 side, of course, set it to the player 2 side, should be standard while the bot refills health. These start at 6, these are standard, these start at 0, these are standard. And in this case, Marisa bot is not meant to recharge, which you are able to set by going here, for example, and changing it to refill, and changing it to some number of frames. I will demonstrate this a little bit later because she can be set like that, but since we're basically just going through quickly now, let's move on. She fights from really far away, and unfortunately it can be a little bit hard to tell exactly what will happen with a shorter range character, but there are not that many very short range characters in this game to begin with. So instead, let's go to focusing on the main thing that matters for her as a character in most matchups. Does your character have a long low? And if so, what do you get off of it? Particularly off of the knockdown from it. Your opponent's goal will generally be to space themselves perfectly. She is one of those big body, perfect spacing characters. But she's very, very weak to long lows, particularly those lows that knock down. If you get good stuff out of your lows, go for it. But she does have counters to them, and you have to learn when those counters are likely to happen, based on her spacing, which is the thing we spent the most time working on. She also has some high-low mix-ups that you probably won't be spending a lot of time bot point-wise learning to deal with. More so because she doesn't have a lot of lows herself. The mix-up itself is important, but not one that comes up often enough, except against the most annoying of characters. Well, players, rather. We made sure that she has the option. She has basically all her options. And you can spend some time learning the spacing. If you are the sort of person who wants to contrast the CPU to this, here we have CPU 6. This isn't very different, but the main reason we don't have this as our main is because the CPU can, as we say often, read inputs. We're not sure it's actually doing that in Street Fighter 6. They could have just gone around that by now and actually made them fight outright. But on the other hand, they have a whole system, i.e. dynamic controls, at least they were planning on it, where that's all that happens. It makes decisions based on how far away you are and to some extent what you're doing. So we explicitly have the standard, this is going to read your inputs and respond. I don't see a good reason why they would have left it out of the CPU here. So, because she's a much more difficult character to deal with if she's reading your inputs, in terms of learning what you need to do to her, we decided we're going to take the bot just in case. It's not terribly difficult to deal with the CPU. And honestly, it's actually kind of difficult to tell the difference between the CPU and the bot a lot of the time. If you're not making too many mistakes of your own, the CPU doesn't really have a response most of the time. The bot at least will do things that don't make sense properly and put itself in interesting situations. But even the CPU does this a little bit, so it's not as if you desperately needed a Marisa bot. It only comes up in one other sense. We know for a fact that the CPU is powerful enough now, the AI is powerful enough, that it responds differently to different characters. And while sometimes that's really great because it teaches you more about how to fight them, it might not be what players do. And those players might do things that don't make sense, and therefore you need to punish them for these nonsensical things. And a lot of the reason why bots exist is to deal with that, to help you learn to do counters for things that aren't necessarily good ideas, but require you to have a response or a skill that teaches the opponent why they shouldn't do it. And so, this is provided anyway, but this Marisa CPU is probably enough to get you started if you have either trouble inputting the bot, or don't have time to use it, or just want to occasionally alternate between the two so that you get the feeling of two different styles of fighting. And with that, therefore, we'll go on to her inputs. It's fairly common for us to provide these more so as guidelines on this stream, and that will continue to be true. Today, I made sure to have the bot input by team members who don't have my exact timing so that I could see what came out of it differently, compare it to my own attempts, and therefore there may be some mild differences between what exactly I say the input is supposed to be and what input you're actually seeing on the screen. But honestly, the whole point is that you could use either and you'll get more or less the same behavior type. Returning repeat replay off, just for the sake of simplifying this. And let's go. Marissa's action 1. Alright, CPU problems. I am still adapting from the whole way that this works in Street Fighter V, but now we should be back. I'm also unused to the fact that we now have the capacity to see the inputs supposedly being used by the CPU, which is kind of helpful. But that's an aside. We're starting the recording replay on Marissa Action 1, and it's fairly simple. It is just a crouching light punch, specifically down bat light punch, followed by a down bat medium punch a little bit after, and a quarter circle forward. Normally I don't show these with repeat replay on because it's not important, but for this one I will show it off quickly. You'll note therefore that this does light Gladius, her quarter circle forward punch. If you're not familiar with how bots work or why, this is the reason I chose to show this off. Even though the light punch is at the beginning of the input, and the quarter circle forward is at the end of the input, because when it replays from one into the other, this works out, you'll find that you should be able to get the move. If you weren't able to press the light punch quickly, it sometimes won't work. And you might want to redo it, but it's not that necessary. You'll notice therefore that even though it is a quarter circle forward into a down back light punch, this still works. And this is really helpful for us because it means we can be a lot more flexible in what inputs we start things with and still get special moves. Her input 2 is also relatively simple. It is a down heavy kick followed by a down forward heavy punch. You should try to make that down heavy kick be on the first frame. And then a down forward throw, quarter circle back. This has the same sort of thing. If I turn the repeat replay on, she'll behave a little differently. This is one input that will give her her sputum guard, and in this case it will go into using the overhead version. So even if you want to change other inputs or mess around with different stuff, that one is a quick way to get scutum to happen, even though it means that it will always be followed by the overhead. For action 3, turn this back off. And there's our 99 neutral marker. This is simply a down double punch, followed by a quarter circle forward throw, but most importantly, end it by going back from the forward to the down and try to end it fairly quickly. If you don't end it particularly quickly, she will not use her flying punch. And as you can see here, there's a 13 frame moment there, which means we may need to change this later so that she can use her flying punch more effectively. But there are actually a lot of other 6-3-2 forward, down inputs in this bot, so we'll still see it. Just understand that if you get this wrong on, or take too long on all of them, she may not be able to use this move at all. Her action 4 is much simpler. It's just a back heavy punch, release the back and tap it again really quickly, and then once again a forward, down, down. In this case, literally, as you can see by the frames, 6-3-2. That is not specifically intended, it just turned out that way. This will again help out with getting her to have her flying punch and related inputs. Action 5. A standing medium kick, followed by a forward medium punch, a forward heavy punch, and holding that heavy punch all the way until the end of the input while going from forward to down to back. Probably you'll want to put your heavy punch on one of the shoulder buttons if you use pad in order to make this easier to input quickly. Because you must end the recording with her holding the heavy punch. Her action 6 is quite similar. A heavy plus medium punch, probably with the medium punch on whatever button you find easiest to hold. Release, tap forward again, release, tap forward again. And then down, forward. This is one of the ones that we expect to be shifting around somewhat, possibly between now and bot release, but for now you can go with it as is and worry about the shifts that we make to it later. If you put it in the way it is, you'll get the bot that we have now, that you're about to see on screen for a bit longer. Her slot 7 is quite simple as well. Just heavy punch plus heavy kick. Press forward for a bit. And then hold heavy kick. Specifically forward heavy kick. Up forward. And then a back dash. Technically the character would be in the air. And I'll put repeat replay on to show off some of this. But when you record it, she's going to be doing other stuff and won't actually be there. It's only when you replay it into itself in specific timings that this happens. This is partially because of a different thing related to bot inputs as a whole. Namely that if you hold the kick until the end and it then restarts, you'll find that you don't actually press the kick when you do the heavy punch, heavy kick. You'll only be treated as pressing the punch. But we'll have some more information on this from the bot side on our website, 2-mk.org, specific to Street Fighter 6 as we go forward. And finally, her slot 8, or rather, would have been if she hadn't punched me. For slot 8, a back heavy punch plus medium kick. And you can see here, we are holding the heavy punch the entire time. So you probably, once again, want it on a shoulder button or whichever button is easiest for you to hold on your control. And then just tap a forward light punch, another 6-3-2 input, and end, making sure to hold the heavy punch all the way until the end.
If you come to fight, then fight!
So, now that we've got all that out of the way, we're going back to discussing what the bot's goals are in much more precise terms. This type of bot is a little bit difficult to get a hang of learning from, because one of the things that is required of you is actually quite easy. And because it's relatively easy, it can be easy to just think, well, I'll just spam it until it works. But try not to do that for this bot, because it's important to try to pick up the reason why you were told to do it more so than the specifics of it. We considered not making it a point, but it doesn't really make sense to do that given how effective she can be at things. And not every character has Chun-Li's level of crouching heavy kick. So, point 1, the easiest point, is simply to hit her with your crouching heavy kick, probably. If your longest button is actually better, for example, JP is down forward heavy punch, I believe. just use that button. Your best low. At higher difficulty levels of the bot, the thing you'd be trying to do is actually much more executionally heavy and complicated. Specifically, to hit with a special cancelable low, if you have one of even reasonable range for dealing with her, and then manage the drive rush cancel from that low. And in that case, you can give yourself lots of drive meter to make it a little bit easier to do the practice as a whole. I'm not particularly good at drive rush cancels yet, for example, so it's quite a useful thing to have as a practice option. And it will generally help you to learn not to do it constantly just because it's a thing you can fish for to get you offense. She's a character who can punish you for doing it if you're not aware. It's fairly easy to watch Marisa and figure out when you should or should not hit the low to stop her from advancing or doing a move. But if you're using a slightly less ranged one, for example, and focus on something like doing a counter, then it can be a little bit harder to actually do. And of course there's the executional difficulty of it on top of that. There's a difference between being able to do that cancel, no, not that one, being able to do the cancel in a standard match situation and being able to do it just, okay, I've turned on a dummy and tried to do this a few times. Simply because the way the mind works means you're probably already focused on something else and it's harder to do just because of that. In my case, the way I choose to do this move means I usually don't even have the option of waiting until I've seen whether the hit has happened. Which makes her a good choice because most of the time, not only will you be able to confirm that the hit happened, you generally could assume that it was fine either way. What you can't assume is that you'll get away with it because she has a lot of moves and a lot of recovery setups where she starts something armored and you therefore don't actually hit with whatever it is you choose to do. So while it is the easiest point, it does have a much harder version. One other relatively easy point, is to parry some of her attacks. Technically, we should be able to say you could parry any attack, but the problem with this is that it's not compatible with the setting your drive meter to high, because you're supposed to parry only the things that are going to hit you from far that are basically perfectly spaced. And you need to be able to recognize that overdoing this will cause you to run out of drive gauge. You're meant to experience this because she's a relatively powerful character in Burnout. The bot not so much so because it's a little bit more random, but you kind of care because other people can be the same way. She benefits from the fact that many of her moves both look the same and can outright have different amounts of time they take to start up. Meaning if you try to parry them perfectly, you would have to have a lot of knowledge of Marisa's moves. Getting perfect parries on them is really quite difficult a lot of the time. At least for the sort of person who hasn't played a lot of this type of game. So you can build up your parrying skill as a generality. And yeah, you can just take the point for just parrying. That, for example, is fine. But, of course, as I said at the beginning, bear in mind that if you just go for points and nothing more, it's not very easy to deal with her when you quote-unquote meet her in the wild. So, it's one of those bots that requires you to have at least some specific focus on understanding what it is you were trying to learn from it, rather than just get the point and assume that that has taught you most of what you need. Beyond that, it's fairly simple. You'll notice that she isn't really using her critical art, but she does actually have it. The condition under which she uses it is very specific. I wanted to make it a specific point, but I'm more so willing now to make it a trade-off, sort of. You can either take points from both dealing with her critical art and her drive impact, or if you want to make it really hard on yourself, just be ready for the critical art. You can consider it as you don't generally get points for dealing with her drive impact at higher difficulty levels, but if you still manage the hey, I've dealt with her critical art even though I'm not doing any drive impact stuff, I'm not taking points for the drive impact stuff, then you're good. You're not generally supposed to use your own drive impact against this character in neutral as a main tool, because most players of Marisa will probably have all sorts of punishes for that. So bear that in mind as well. There we go. And I didn't land in time, but I kind of wanted her to hit. You can throw that move if you're in the right spacing, and you can get out of the way or parry it specific ways if you aren't. And the final point is only hard because it's rare. Anti-airs. It does not count that flying punch, though you can anti-air it. In fact, one of the important things to know is that that move is beatable by a lot of medium kicks. A lot of just standing medium kicks in this game beat that move. But you're mostly looking to anti-air as best you can. She actually has a better jump-in arc than we've given her, so it's kind of important to remember this when you're fighting actual players. The main reason why we didn't go with that is because though she can jump with just her heavy kick, and it be somewhat stressful, most of the time if you do your anti-air, you either happen to trade and win out anyway, or, for whatever reason it seems, that she doesn't actually get much off it. She might hit you with the kick itself, but tends to be actually disadvantaged herself after it. But note this is not true for every character, so there is a way to fix this, and we will mention it on the page, but we basically come to the end of the Marisa section of the stream, and I won't go into a lot on it now. Just know that you can change around one of the things where she jumps by shifting which button you hold at the end of, I believe it is her action 8. I'll verify that before we move on, and no, 7 then. Yeah. We just changed that to hold the punch instead of the kick, and she will jump in with kick more. But we don't necessarily recommend it because we haven't tested in full as yet that it manages everything else the bot is supposed to do, but we'll try to confirm that this weekend and make sure that the bot release meets all the notes required. But let's head over to Bathur's Beach and meet up with DJ more or less on time. So you can consider that I'm just going to be restarting the stream in spirit. We're still going to be talking about the things in the exact same order as before. Why does this bot exist? This bot exists primarily because we wanted to have a bot that simulated the feeling of trying to fight someone who is specifically trying to frustrate you, and not a lot else. There is a certain style of player online who generally will just try to run away from you and do whatever it takes to make you as irritated in the sense of fighting them as possible. DJ by himself isn't a character who is specifically based around actually doing this, but he's among the best at it in the game, so you can expect to see it at least some of the time. There are other much more effective ways to play this character, but they do still tend to involve some tricking an opponent with your spacing and using his really good normals and back stances to frustrate them at least a bit. But we did want to simulate the sort of person who backs off, mashes a lot of buttons in neutral, and so on. He does still have most of the tools required to function the other way, but it was still a core goal when making the bot. Therefore, you won't actually learn much about punishes or any strong DJ pressure, anything like that. You can just switch to the CPU to get that though, which is a really useful thing. Normally we try to make bots that complement the CPU, and this was a particularly good choice in this case because the CPU fights entirely differently than this. But we were able to confirm from the people we did encounter in the wild, even at locals, that while they are not necessarily the "I'm just going to run from you" style, they understand how to use it enough that it can be used if things are not going their way, or if they realize there's a high chance the opponent is weak to it, let's say. If you're easily frustrated, this is a good bot for you to train on. Even if it will only get you used to it. But the CPU is an entirely different beast. It does way more damage. Again, intentionally, because we want you to understand that this character isn't necessarily damaging by default. He has to take risks a lot of the time, or you have to make meaningful mistakes. And that's what the player who plays like the bot is usually trying to get you into, to make a mistake so that they can actually leverage all that damage. But without it, he's not that threatening, which is important. But you can see there that he still embodies a bit of it. If you've decided, okay, I want to hit you now, but you're all the way over there, let me just do something quick. See? Especially in this case where the bots, with the CPU's input reading, as we call it, comes in handy. You can basically never get away with just the, okay, I'm doing stuff from over here to see if I can reach you really quickly. But the CPU does have a relatively large weakness. It does a lot of things that are unsafe simply because he's the type of character who has moves that start up so relatively slowly that he doesn't really get away with not starting them. He doesn't get away with just going, okay, well, I'm going to wait for you to do something and have my move beat your move. He generally has to do his move first and hope that something like that happens. And this can help you learn which of your own moves are too slow for this purpose, causing you to run into the problem. This is usually more so space independent than anything else though, so be careful about that. But yes, if you want to learn to punish DJ for stuff, and to get away from that sort of throw, the CPU is more than enough right now, which is a really useful thing to have. Also helps you deal with throw loops and defense in the corner. A lot of this depends on your character very precisely. Some characters have a lot of trouble doing the exact thing required, and others will punish him all day. But the core reason why DJ as a character is relatively easy to deal with in this way is because, as you can see from the CPU, it doesn't actually try to use his lows all that often. It spends more time trying to trick you in the standard method. This is partially because of the unique properties of his lows, specifically that his heavy kick is a slide and his medium kick is actually the knockdown. But there's a whole lot of other specific small theory involved in why he's like that. The main one you need to remember is that DJ's moves almost always involve him standing up. And he usually isn't taking his own hurt box away in any way. In fact, A large part of his design in this game, I would bet, is based on the idea that they had to add it. He doesn't naturally do it in any form before Street Fighter 6. Because he doesn't have his back sway. The tricky move that they've added to make him more effective here. Without it, he tends to either do very little damage because his buttons don't combo well, or get kicked in the head, or whatever your character's best approximate neck height normal is, will often stop him. And he in turn tends to make himself very open while trying to avoid this problem. Now, this is not to say that you can just spam the button whenever you want. There is a very specific timing you have to learn. But once you've learned it, it basically dominates the matchup. The timing and spacing for actually doing this is the thing you care about for most of it. And once you've got it, it basically makes the matchup easy, in the sense that it's easy to understand what to do. The second half of what you generally want to do against him, for example, is if he is in range, and you don't think it's a good idea to hit that move, you either parry or throw. You throw him if he's particularly close by whatever it was he did, and you parry if he was attacking, you interrupted the attack, but he could keep going. That's something that I'll try to make as clear as possible in the bot, maybe in the in-depth section, just as a general way to fight this character. But I'm demonstrating this, believe it or not, on the CPU, I believe. Yep, still going at it. But to be basically to understand, I can press her back/forward medium punch a lot. And it's not that DJ won't hit me for doing this, it's that DJ won't hurt me very much for doing this. Particularly if you have good throw defense. Then, of course, players will be able to fall back on using his projectile. And if you've gotten to the point of proving to them that you understand this, and that you can just go, no, I'm just gonna move around a little bit and then hit this, they're gonna have to use up a lot of energy to do certain things like that. This is a relatively advanced thing to be doing, to the point where we consider it a kata, but we don't normally try to make a lot of commentary on katas when it comes to bots, especially when they're not fully developed yet. But it figures it was important enough for you to know. He'll use up a lot of energy trying to get in the other way as well. But he can whittle you down just by doing this, so it's not something you should overlook. Going back to the bot itself, therefore, the bot is intended to do none of that. The bot is intended to make your life miserable by sometimes going in with sudden attacks, poking you into the wall, just doing certain things over and over again until you get frustrated and try to deal with it, but your opponent has at that moment chosen not to do it anymore, and so on. He will also jump, but he'll also jump back and spam certain things. Whether or not you set the drive gauge recovery, therefore, has to do with the sort of training you want to do, and it doesn't affect the bot's points at all. Today we're going to set it to 40 frames, similar to Jamie. So to understand what this setting does, note DJ's drive gauge is going down, and its current recovery has nothing to do with the 40 frames thing. As long as DJ keeps moving and we keep fighting, the gauge will keep refilling. But, as you may have seen just for a moment if you were watching the gauge due to me talking about it, after some number of frames of him not doing much, it will instantly refill. We've done our best to make it so that he does tend to keep moving, and therefore it's only probably on certain knockdowns that he'd actually refill entirely. But it is in there, and it's important that it's in there because he is the type of character where you gain more from having to deal with it constantly than needing to deal with his burnout. But if we set it there, we still have just enough information about how to deal with burnout, and he doesn't tend to refill because of us giving him so much movement until you've actually, like, meaningfully damaged him in some way. But you see it there, he just refills for no specific reason. You can go ahead and watch the gauge more so than anything else happening on the screen at this time if that's what you're currently trying to understand. There are other things about this character that cause his gauge to seemingly refill faster, but this might just be something else in the settings that we haven't fully fleshed out yet, and we'll be working on figuring it out for you as we go, particularly before we do any bot release fully. One of our core goals with DJ Bot was to make sure that he was random enough that he could be really frustrating, in that you won't necessarily get to practice what you were thinking you were going to practice in any given round. He's also much less punishing in a specific way, and it will let you practice the range for your jab him in the neck, kick him in the head sort of flows. If you do this enough times and at the right spacing, it causes a rhythm of his where he's spending more time in neutral, and because he's spending more time in neutral, he has more time to back off, to use his drive rush and drive impact. Basically, the better you fight him, the better you space yourself, the more annoying he becomes. And this doesn't really require too much perfection in the bot's inputs. If you stick close to him, it will generally fight back and do a lot of different things. But if you are trying to space yourself, mainly because DJ players will generally not let you do anything else, he'll spend more time just moving around and hitting you with stuff like that. But let's go on to inputs, and I do have to make a change to one of them, or rather, to show off a variant of one of them. Again, DJ's actions are mostly simple. The problem with them tends to be that their speed requirements are a little higher than a lot of others. So, moving on then. Action 1. This is just a standing light kick, then a standing heavy punch, followed by a drive rush cancel. In this case, we've chosen to do the drive rush cancel in the quote-unquote better way, with the forward, medium punch plus medium kick. I think that's held slightly. But, as it turns out, you don't actually have to do it this way. I'll actually stand closer to show off something, and I guess for now I should set this to refill. And we're going to replay it again. Note that if you hit the light kick and the light kick makes contact, the heavy punch won't happen. Technically, if you're fast enough, the heavy punch doesn't happen at all. But you don't actually have to be that fast for this input to work out. It is a little better if you are. But It's the sort of thing where you just record it and move on, and if you happen to have a good day, it's such an easy input that you could probably just redo it whenever you thought you could do it better and move on. Slot 2, therefore, is similarly simple. It's literally just light kick, light punch, medium punch. Technically, these are a little too close together for this specific input, but it doesn't actually matter either, because what you're usually trying to get him to do is related to causing him to do specific moves in specific ways. So the medium punch's position matters for something else, but it doesn't matter that much. Holding the medium punch until the end can definitely be really important for this one, because it changes other things later on. If you didn't watch the Marissa part of this stream, there's an explanation in there, and there will be an explanation on our website, 2-mk.org, about why you want to hold specific inputs at the end of others. If you're not familiar already, that is. The key point here, therefore, is that the light kick takes up so much time that the light punch is sometimes not visible, and if the light punch is visible, as in it animates, usually the medium punch will not be. There is a situation in which the light punch is not visible and the medium punch is visible, and this is also okay. The key is that this is just a fast input. There's nothing specific to it. But we were working on a specific difference here, and the difference that I'm probably going to input now, and you're likely to see on the bot page, is to actually make these all crouching. If they're all crouching, then DJ gets a charge for his rising kick, and without it, as it currently is, he doesn't get this charge. So we're going to re-record this one as our demonstration of how to basically record things at all. And you'll know that it's on input, countdown settings, 0, etc. This now works a lot more like if you're familiar with our Unist or Melty-Blood bots, where you can change the buttons around so that the button you're pressing to start the recording is also an input that it takes at the beginning of the recording. But I'm going to show you what happens when you don't do that. Our goal here is to press the down back light kick on the first frame together. Some people can do this easily and some people can't, but it does matter at least a bit. So we'll replay just that. But even without replaying it yet, we can see some information on the right side of the screen. I took 2 frames of pressing down back. You can see it after the 99 frames of neutral. I took 2 frames of pressing down back before I managed to press the light kick. And for some bots, for some inputs, this matters. Again, there will be information on the site as to how to manage it without that more easily. But for this purpose, I'm only going to attempt this one more time and move on, simply because it's not that important that it happens for this recording. It was technically what mattered with the speed. "40 frames. Did I miss any of the actual parts of it? Let's attempt a replay. On controller, you're probably, if you're moving your fingers too fast, likely to touch your triangle button at sometimes. So there are different times where if you find yourself having that problem a lot, try turning it off. For those who are familiar with our Street Fighter V bots, I'll make this note now. On input no longer means on attack button input. If I start moving, the recording starts. And that is why the first frame trick from our Street Fighter V glossary does not work anymore. And we'll have to make a new set of information to how to do it quicker or easier that way. "36 frames of charge." You can make it longer if you want him to do more up kicks, but for now it's fine. So again, the likeliest input that we're going to be using is actually down back light kick, 1 LK, down back light punch, down back medium punch, and we are expecting the down back medium punch to not animate. Moving on to action 3, therefore. This is simpler. Forward light punch plus heavy punch, and then a half circle back and a heavy kick. It doesn't really require you to hold the heavy kick until the end of the recording. It kind of helps occasionally, but it doesn't matter, and most of his other inputs are not built in a way where that will affect the bot much. So you don't have to worry that you held it to the end of the recording somehow. Action 4 is a up forward medium punch plus light kick. We decided to go with this instead of medium kick plus light kick because he does get some benefit out of having his instant jump medium punch anti-air even on the bot, and a lot of the other things we have you hold the button for where it actually might matter. It's the medium punch you're holding for the whole thing here, so he still has the option to do this if you hold certain other medium punches. Specifically if you held the medium punch in the previous input. Again, information mostly for a bot page, more so than now. But just remember that if you really care about those up kicks a lot, hold the medium punch at the end of action 2. That medium kick, as noted, is held for the entirety of action 4. Sorry, medium punch is held for the entirety of action 4. And if you use the medium kick, obviously hold that. Your goal is actually to go all the way to back. So you're going up forward, half circle back. In this case, we didn't go with that, partially because it makes the bot flow slightly differently. And it does not matter if you do it or not for this bot because he already has a lot of inputs like that. But it will change his behavior, so when we release it, recognize that that will probably be something that shifts the bot slightly. I'm not re-recording it now, but it'll come up. His slot 5 is a forward medium kick plus light kick, and you're basically holding the medium kick for a little bit, but you don't really have to. As you can see, it's released almost immediately. It just takes a little longer to be released than the other things. Followed by a throw, which can be in basically any direction, but we put it as neutral here to make it slightly easier. And then you're holding down back for a certain amount of time. It doesn't have to be enough to give him a charge though, that's not really the point at all. The point is to make sure that he has the charge in a specific situation that I'll show off later. And in this case, the slightly imperfect recording will help me show that off before we end the stream. So you are holding it for around 20 frames, it doesn't matter that much, and I'll go into detail as to why. His action 6, you can use either a standing or a forward heavy punch plus heavy kick, and you're aiming to hold the heavy punch until the end. And yet another half circle back input. That's it. Holding the heavy punch until the end gives him yet another situation in which he will do this and it will cause a move to happen. Action 7 also has a variation option. This is literally just a punch, a standing light punch, followed by another standing light punch. And in that second standing light punch, try to be really quick about this. Backdash and then tap up back for a moment and then end the recording basically immediately. This isn't meant to give him anything other than a slightly annoying jump back at a timing that will help him escape from throws and certain moves in neutral. If you want him to have more projectiles as a standard part of his kit, you generally should just make this a forward light punch instead of a standing light punch. And because it is easy enough, this one I will re-record for a quick demonstration of some things toward the end. It does not matter if the second light punch is actually hidden or not, and it doesn't matter if it's neutral or not. Only the first one matters. It also doesn't need to be first frame at all, so we're going to just put it in. In this case, for example, I missed the up back. And in this case, I put in a neutral jump that I don't want.